A little bit about Alan. He's very humble and he's a little shy to mention sometimes his own qualifications. But if you look at um, him and all the creds that he has there, incredible. I think more than 19 black belts. He's trained with some of the highest masters in martial arts. 44 years of martial arts. He started when he was 1 year old. Actually, he's probably a little bit older than that, but his life has been martial arts, and we were lucky to meet him. Uh, he's humble. He said he started in 2012, but really it was 2009 when we really got him going. Uh, so I think that's it on me. So I'd like to turn it over to Alan. Um, Alan is a phenomenal person and a master of many, rappelling, diving, um, besides martial arts. He developed a system specifically for EPI. He came through our program. He studied our industry. We worked together with him and some of the instructors that have years and years of experience. It started out on one level and it's grown as multiple levels. Uh, it is the only system, defensive tactics for executive protection in the world. I, and I guarantee anybody that goes through the program, money back guaranteed. I've never had to give a dime back to anybody, but I offer that because Alan's program is phenomenal. I stand behind it. I believe in it, and I believe in Alan Baker. Alan, please get me, stop me from talking. I'm sure the translators are going nuts. Alan, it's all yours. You have to unmute your mic. Oh, Kenny, oops. Kevin, can you make sure he can unmute?
Okay, do you have me?
Yeah, there you are.
All right. Thank you for that intro. I'll do my best to live up to it. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, just to follow up on some of the story that Jerry was speaking about. I originally got introduced to EPI to solve a problem. They had a common problem, really, that I saw at that time, and even today in the protection industry and in law enforcement, was a revolving door of defensive tactics instructors. So they would bring someone in and they would teach their art. And, generally in the beginning, it's pretty impressive. We'll train it, we'll try to implement it. But after we have implemented it, we find out after about 6, 7 months, well, it doesn't work particularly well in our environment. So we said, we'll find someone else. So we go to another system. And then the process starts over again. So when I first met Doc Kobetz, he had gone through a few of these people, and I was very fortunate to be one of them that got introduced. And my goal was to not just come in and teach what I knew. I wanted to see what they taught first, and I also wanted to get experience in the environment. So I went through the 7-day course. I actually got to go through it more than once. I got to sit through a 3-day program as part of the process. And then I was very fortunate that the EPI team started to let me do some of the work. I got to work with some clients, some relatively high level clients, and very recognizable individuals. So I could firsthand see what they're dealing with. What environments are they in? What did they wear? What did they drive? What is the common interaction they would have with not just a threat? It could be someone that's just a fan, someone that just wanted to speak to the client, all the way up to a potential threat. And then based on that, we designed the program from the inside out. We built it specifically around those parameters. And then as we move forward, probably a bulk of the process was coming back every year, twice a year, and teaching the material, but also getting to go to the instructors and ask them. I probably bugged them to death because every time I showed up, I'm like, anything happened since last time? Did you have to put your hands on anybody? Did you have to touch a shoulder? Anything at all? Tell me about it. And then what happened? What was the outcome? A lot of the guys that teach at EPI, they run protection companies. So they have clients that they're working with, obviously. Then they have teams that protect those clients. I'll, what happened with your team? I had a conversation with one of the instructors this last class who had a little incident where hands had to be involved with a potential threat, and it may not have been handled correctly. That is great information for me. So I try to get that from those guys every time I see them, and I have for the last 15 years. I didn't realize it was 15 years until Jess reminded me of that before this call. But that process over those years has, like Jerry said, evolved and helped this process grow, and it continues to do so. So, one of the things we want to do with this, and we've wanted to do the whole time, is address the challenges that are out there for protection agents. And one of the major challenges, and I see this on the law enforcement side as well. I travel quite extensively and work with a lot of law enforcement groups around the United States, is the threat out there is being they have more education due to the popularity of mixed martial arts, jujitsu, wrestling, catch wrestling. More and more people are doing it, the good guys and the bad guys. So I've had clients that I've worked with, both in the protection industry and the law enforcement industry, that are having to deal with these individuals that have higher levels of training. And it makes a difference in that interaction. So that is one of the challenges, probably one of the main ones that we want to address with PRT in the industry. Next slide, please. So part of addressing those challenges, and we looked at the environment that this needed to be designed at. But another problem in the industry was how it was being delivered. So we not only wanted to build a method, a system specifically around how a protection agent interacts into his environment, but we wanted to look at the delivery method of it as well. And one of the first things we took a look at is the difference between just an education event and just an experience event. And you see this quite a bit in the industry. It's commonly nicknamed run, jump, shoot. So you'll go to the event, you sign up for it, and it's a very exciting event. They'll make you do exactly what I said, run, jump through the hoops. It feels like a lot. It's very exciting. But at the end of the weekend, you kind of look back and you're like, wow, that was great, but what did I get out of it? I feel like I did a lot of stuff, but I didn't come away with it with a lot of those golden nuggets. Now, the other side of that is the education experience or education event. Now, both are important, but a lot of sources out there kind of overemphasize the experience and they don't give that education. And that's something that we wanted to change with our educational process because it makes a real difference in our clients. We wanted to slow down and talk about the educational parts that the client or the student can take with them that's really going to make a difference. And we have several things that we implement to do that. And one of the things that we try to do, if we have anyone on this call that has gone through the class before, when I say the wall of knowledge, you will recognize that because one of the things we do is we teach PRT. It's over the course of 3 days, you do 18 plus hours of training. But we will build a wall of curriculum, and it's been nicknamed the wall of knowledge over the years. But by the end of the 3rd day, you will have curriculum that you can take with you. It's one of the reasons we build this. We don't want you to just come and have an event, an experience, just education. I want the students to come and be able to leave knowing what to do between now and maybe next year if I see them again, or maybe 2 years. We have quite a few students that will revisit the program on a regular basis. It's consistent, whether it's every 6 months. We have guys I'll see once a year. I have guys that I see pretty much every 2 years because they know when they leave, they have that information and they'll train it. And then they come back and go, okay, I've got to this point. What's next? And that's what we want to do with the wall of knowledge, because consistent training of some type, even on your own, makes a real difference in your education. One of the other things we want to address is gaps in knowledge in the methodology or the curriculum that you're getting. Now, this can be a problem in doing just martial arts. A lot of times they'll answer one thing. The art is focused on a specific area of combat. But as an example, if we take a look at the ground area, which is pretty common or pretty popular in the last 20 years because of MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the answer for that is often, well, just go to Jiu-Jitsu, go take a grappling class. But as a professional, you may not necessarily have the time to invest in a Jiu-Jitsu class. But that's one of the reasons we want to introduce those other possible gaps of information in the ground section. And so what are they? Yes, one is grappling, but two may be anti-grappling. A third one in this area would be ground fighting. A fourth one in this area would be dog boxing. Dog boxing is a study of out of position fighting. So all of these are possibilities. They're all things that potentially could happen if you were to end up on a ground with a threat. And the reason we want to know these other areas is because they're not as commonly known as grappling, but they are legitimate answers to dealing with a threat if it has ended up in this situation. Some of them are easier to learn and easier to implement than grappling. For instance, anti-grappling. That is a study of grappling and what it does, what are the common things it wants to achieve so that I can use it against itself, so that I can cheat and win, then get up quickly and go protect my client. Ground fighting is an equal study. It looks more at delivering ballistic force and not grappling. I want to avoid that because that gets me tied up. It takes time, and then I lose track of my client. That one also answers the multiple opponent equation because there may be more than one. So I need options for that. And dog boxing does the same thing. It introduces an additional possibility in that area. Now, one of the reasons I want to know this is because if I am placed in that environment, it gives me an option to take the threat out of the environment that he is familiar with. If he happens to be a grappler and I can force him into anti-grappling or ground fighting, then he now is out of his element and I'm making him fight my game. And that's one of the reasons we try to educate on all those gaps of knowledge during the PRT program. You'll get easier answers that take less time investment to be good at, but are equally, if not more effective to finish that encounter quickly so that I can get out of that environment and back to work protecting the client. Now, each area, we're just focusing on ground, but each area in the PRT, we try to break down in a similar fashion, whether it is striking, bladed weaponry, or use of a firearm. Another one is addressing deeper learning. And this is we mentioned this earlier with just an experience or a educational process that you take something away. This addresses that. What that is there's multiple layers to learning something. And generally, I look at three. One is technique. The other one is attribute development. And the one below that is body state development. Very common in the industry is just technique. You'll show up, take your class, and you get a list of techniques. Now, that's not a bad thing. It is information, and it may work. But sometimes the best way to teach someone nothing is to teach them too much. If you have too many things in your head and you're placed under a tremendous amount of stress, it's hard to access those things. I commonly hear the term, I need more tools in my toolbox. I'm not a believer in that. I think you need less tools that are multi tools. You need tools that will do multiple things and less of them. Because if you're under a tremendous amount of stress in an active encounter with a threat, I don't have time to access all of those things. So, based on that, yes, I have to learn some technique, but I also need to learn the attributes that make that technique work. And that is something that we do in the program is every technique that we deliver, we also spend time looking at the drills needed to develop the attributes to be good at it. Sensitivity, timing, or placement. Now, the unique thing about these attributes is they're timeless tools. So if you're like me, I'm just now entering my late teens, but I hear someday that when I get into my later 20s, I might lose some strength, I might lose some speed, I don't have that youth anymore. So if I've based everything I do on those attributes, then I lose them as I get later in my career. But if I can choose attributes that are not based on those things, like timing, intelligent placement, and positioning, well, I can hold on to those skill sets longer in my career and still be equally as effective. And that's one of the reasons for that second layer of study. Now, the third layer that we focus on in the program is body state training. What body state is basically the state you are in physically when you express a technique, when you do anything, whether it is a martial art technique, opening a door, or just pushing a car in the parking lot. If you understand and have good control of your body state, you will be more effective. You will be more substantial. And this is another element that we want to be able to add to the technique. When we go through this process, it allows us to really simplify the things we need, simplify our tools, but they become more effective tools. And that is goes right back to what we said. I don't want a big toolbox of tools that are confusing. I want the few multi-tools that are in there, and I am very good at them. Next slide, please. All right. So we already kind of mentioned this a little bit, but one of the things about PRT is it is specifically built around the environment. We take into consideration what you wear when you do your work, what you drive when you do your work. There's a portion that is related to defensive tactics in and around a vehicle, whether I'm protecting myself or I'm having to go protect the client. An example of this is when a lot of the changes in the safety mechanisms they're putting in cars now, they're good most of the time, but they can also disable that vehicle when I need it most. And as we know, the vehicle can be a major tool to get us off the X and out of the line of fire. So if that vehicle shuts down, I am then forced to get out of the vehicle and deal with it myself. So now those tactics start to become important, especially if there's more than one or two opponents. I still have to get out and do my best to protect my client, get them out of the car, and then get them off the X. So we took all of that into consideration when designing it. Next is to address those gaps in knowledge that are in the industry. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but one of the things we try to do is design the program on what I call the combat blueprint. And that ensures that we have good active instruction and answers in the full spectrum of the exchange between you and a potential threat. So one section is firearms. That's pretty obvious. Everything we do in PRT takes into consideration that we are going to have some sort of weaponry on us. That changes a lot of things. If I have a system that throws a simple jab cross, well, when I put a gun on and when I put a suit on, the mechanics have to change. My mindset has to change. So it starts to get away from that martial art and has to become something else. If I have that gun on and I am doing a grappling exchange with a threat, maybe I'm still on my feet, they put hands on me. What I would normally do, for instance, in a catch wrestling class or a jujitsu class, has to change because now I have to take into consideration the firearm, if I have a blade on, and I also have to take into consideration my client is still standing there and I am responsible for them. So martial arts sometimes will not address those gaps. And those are really the main gaps we need answers for. We need information that is designed and built around that truth, that reality. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do and address in the industry is actually give those answers. We want to have responses for a full spectrum of force or the full spectrum of violence. Having a force continuum is pretty common in law enforcement. I have low levels of force, medium, up to assault level, all the way up to lethal levels of force. We do the same thing in the PRT, and this is very important. And again, it is a gap in knowledge because most martial arts systems do not take this into consideration. So we need to have a good method of verbal exchange. We nickname it the gift of gab. I need to have verbal tools that I can implement that can help me interact and de escalate whatever is going on between me and the potential threat. If the threat makes contact, then I need to have low level control methods that are socially acceptable. They need to look socially acceptable and they need to be non insulting. So if I put my hands on you and I do it the wrong way and you get angry about it, then I'm not accomplishing my de escalation. So we actually spend a lot of time as protection agents in this environment. If we look at that scale and through conversations with the instructors at EPI, been very fortunate to talk to all of them about this. These guys have been training 30, 40, 50 years in this industry. And I'll ask them all this question. I can see Jerry maybe smiling over this one. I'll say, in your career, how many times did you ball up a fist and hit someone? And a common answer I think I got from one individual was, well, in the last 40 something years, I think once. And it wasn't a good day, it was a mistake. But then I would ask, how often do you put your hands on people and just control them and move them around in a socially acceptable way? And the response I normally get back is every day. I'm constantly touching people and moving them because that's my job. With that in mind, this is one of the most important levels of force. We call it a soft control in PRT. And we have an entire method based on this. And then if the threat forces us up the scale of elevation, the next level we study is hidden force. Well, he's not quite getting it. And I need to give him a little friendly nudge to let him know what could be next. But I have to do it in a visually appropriate way. And that is the next level. I'd like to bring it back down, but I'm able to produce stronger amounts of force, raise my physical voice, so to speak, and then coax them back down. If the threat continues to drive it up the scale, the next one for us is assault tactics. I call it assault tactics because from the outside looking in, who's assaulting who? Sometimes you can be forced into an assault level exchange, and then someone shows up, maybe like law enforcement, and sees what's going on, and they're like, well, who's the bad guy here? I don't know. And maybe a small section of a video is caught on a cell phone. Uh, and they pick the worst part, that one moment when you don't look good. That's the part they're going to use and put all over the internet because that's going to get me a lot of likes on Instagram. So with that in consideration, even at the assault level, I still have to take the visuals into consideration. Now, that obviously goes up to a certain point. That's one of the reasons why at the assault level, we actually divide that into two parts. The first part we call being the pro, and the second part we nickname gloves are off. So, what do I mean by being a pro at an assault level exchange? It's unfortunate, but we're professionals, and sometimes we just have to deal with getting our ass kicked. It's just part of the job. I've had clients who work on TV shows, and they have to be there to protect the talent. And sometimes, due to what is required per the contract and insurance, if there's a physical exchange between the talent, they have to step in. But that's not always good television. So I had an actual client one time contact me and go, look, I've got to get between them, but I can't stop it too soon because it's good television. How can I do this? And we answered the question. And that is an example of sometimes I've just got to be the pro. This can obviously vary per your experience and your background and your training. But that's one of the answers we want to give you is how do you do it? We also give you ways to look visually appropriate at this level. And then, of course, there's a certain point that it might reach when it's just time to go and gloves are completely off. And I don't have to worry about it anymore. Legally, I am to the point where I can give a full answer. At that point, we want to know the best possible answer to deal with one, two, three threats if we have to. In other words, it's time to pull the pin on the grenade and drop it. And we want to have that information in the program as well. Then, obviously, lethal force. And this really exists in all of the levels I've talked about. Even at the soft control level, when I put my hands on someone, they're close enough to reach my gun. They're close enough to throw a shot at me. So I have to control them in a way that's appropriate, but still protects my weapon and still protects the client. So that element, even at those levels, exists. And then in that exchange, I may see someone go for a weapon system, and I have to know what to do. Now, dealing with this is different at close range. Sometimes when we go to a shooting course or the range, the answer is I'll back up, take an angle, and I'll pull my gun out at the same time. I've played this quite a bit with simulations, and it didn't turn out well when I was inside that social distance. I found out that it's better I'm close enough to put my hands on them. So I'm going to use that answer, put them out of position, and then go to a weapon system. This turned into a whole subsystem and a study because it's a different answer than you commonly get when you go to the range. This is what we talk about in the lethal force level of PRT. And we learn how to access this through all levels of the force continuum. So on the last one there, this is really something that we decided we needed to do when we initially started to design this program. And it's something we take into consideration until this day, even if we make adjustments. Everything we do, now up to a certain point, obviously, when the gloves are totally off, has to be visually appropriate. It has to be socially acceptable, and it has to be legally explicable. This has a huge influence on techniques you pick. Some techniques are very effective, but they look visually inappropriate. You may be entirely in your legal right to do certain things, and you put your hands on someone in a visually inappropriate way. Someone takes a photo or a video in that moment, who's in trouble? And like I said, you may be in the right, but you embarrassed your client. He doesn't care. He's going to get rid of you. You embarrassed him. So you have to have answers that are visually appropriate. You have to have them that are socially acceptable. We've seen a shift in society in the last 10 to 20 years. What was acceptable back then may not be as acceptable now. It's unfortunate, but we have to take that into consideration. This also makes us choose certain techniques. It has us express those techniques in certain ways. These changes are not taken into consideration in martial art. If you do a martial art class, it's great information, but they don't talk about this. They don't care about this. But this is very important to us as protection agents. So we need to know what applications of force that will fall inside of these parameters. And then obviously legally explicable. I've got to be able to explain this if someone important or someone in leadership approaches me about it. That's one of the reasons it's good to have a force continuum that is the fundamental structure of your program. Because in your mind, if you have this structure, when I go to have that conversation with leadership, I can give the details of how I was trained and the de escalation process I went through and how that threat forced me to elevate. It's one thing that we talk about at the soft control level and the hidden force level of the PRT is super elevation, because a lot of the guys that come through the course after about 2 days of training, they'll find out that they have a greater amount of control through the methodology of the threat than they thought they could. So when the threat tries to step it up, it doesn't work. He tries to tear off of you to swing, and all of a sudden he can't. So he has to make a decision at that point. In his mind, he has to show you his cards. He has to decide, do I really want to do this? Am I really going to put it in fifth gear? And at that point, if he chooses to, then he's telling me what I have to do next. We just talked about posturing, verbal, soft control, hidden force, assault tactics, and legal force. That posturing element is something that we will connect with our verbal exchange. And it is a study of really predatorial movement of the body. This really is beneficial on both sides. I want to know what a predatorial mind, a predatorial body moves like, because there's certain gestures they'll make, certain shifts in weight that will tell me what's coming, even if I don't have contact with them. But equally, I have the ability through posturing to control what they do. This is an entire art that mixes in with your verbal skills. Sometimes I have to place myself between a client and a threat. I'm walking down a hallway, and how I place myself can determine where that threat or potential threat moves. And so this is also one of the studies that we start to take a look at leading up to soft control. Assault tactics, we talked about that, having to divide that level in half. I'm going to be the pro up to a certain point, and then the gloves are coming off. Another element, and it's a teaching tool, but it is also a filter to make sure that we are filling our gaps in knowledge as we go through this system, is the multiple opponent equation. And we do this because, in my opinion and my experience, there's always a second threat, and there's always a third threat. I will commonly nickname this principle a ghost in the room. Even if they're not there, I should be trained to look for them. I should have developed intelligent optics or optical habits that make me search the room. This is something else that we work on in the first levels of PRT, because if it's there, I need to address it. And there's one other element in this as well, is I am protecting someone and I may be moving them through a room as I do this. I have to deal with the biggest fan, maybe someone that just wants to touch the client, but I still have to move the client along and control that person. And this is addressed in the soft control and hidden force levels of the PRT as well. We mentioned this earlier, how tactics and training will change when you are armed. This actually has a bigger effect on defensive tactics and martial arts than I expected. I learned this myself when I bought a training kit probably 17 years ago, a gun and a blade, and I put them on and I went back and wore them in all of the systems that I train. And I train a lot of different systems. And through this process, I found out that the mechanics that I had been taught had to change everywhere. And then when I started getting introduced to the protection world and the environment they operate in, and the idea of not just self defense, but client defense. I'm not just protecting me and my weapon, but at the same time, I'm protecting a third party. All of this changes the mechanics, where you place yourself, where your hands are placed. And that's one of the major things that we take into consideration as we're going through the program. So one of the things that we also take a look at is I can give you a technique. We do this a lot with the gun disarm and gun retention portion of the PRT. Or I can start to study the principles of success in that area. If I can teach you the principles of success, then you can apply those principles and the knowledge from training those principles in multiple different scenarios. And that allows you to do more. It also allows you to be more effective if you have to be placed in those situations. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is something we discussed earlier, building the system around those different levels of threat and having the ability to have a response. I mentioned earlier getting a chance to talk with one of my peers at the last class, and he had a individual that works for him, younger guy on the team, had a potential exchange. It turned out to not be a major one, and he had to put his hands on the potential threat and handled it appropriately, quite honestly. But the potential threat was the type of person to get his hands on the video and try to make a big deal out of it. And the only reason it became an issue is because of hand placement. He just didn't know what to do with his hands, where to put them. So the knowledge just in the first couple of phases of the system could have changed that. And that's what we're looking at here is having that knowledge that is appropriate for those lower levels. And like we said, if you're good at it, even if the threat wants to raise it up, you still can control it. And it forces that super elevation, which shows you his cards anyway. Next slide, please. All right, so they like Jerry said, over the years, this program has grown, and it's got to the point now where there are 6 different modules, and they introduce different concepts and training, and we deliver these now over the course of 3 days. It's at least 18 hours of training. I have a bad habit of going over sometimes, so it might be a little more. So that first level is introducing the verbal, posturing, those soft controls. Around level 2, we start to go into the assault tactics, and we start to look very unique things at that level. We talk about shielding, and it's a way that visually looks like you're protecting yourself, but you are actually delivering damage. And those are 2 good things to go together when I want to be visually appropriate. Third level, we start to look at vehicle-centric defensive tactics, and we discuss this. This is also connected to dog boxing, which is out of position fighting. You don't see a lot of that in most martial arts. What are the mechanics I need when I'm pinned against a car? Or if I'm in a car seat fighting someone that's trying to pull me out or pull my client out? What if I end up on the ground? And if I know how to do these things, regardless of where I end up, I have good ballistic answers. I can deliver destructive force, get back to my feet, and get back to my job. After that, number four, we start looking at some of those elements in counter or anti-grappling, ground fighting. We start digging deeper into dog boxing in that level. We look at some of the basic grappling. If you don't have any experience, we want you to have a general idea of what that field offers. And then number five, we start adding firearms and edged weaponry into everything. So because it changes everything. And you have to start protecting it regardless of what you're doing, being aware of it, not only mine, but the threat. And we start looking at disarms and retention in that level. And as I said, we try to approach that more on a principle based because honestly, it's a deeper education and you will be more successful if you understand it at that level. And then module 6, which is one we actually introduced last year, starts it to get in information on the standing grappling environment. Now, this is something else that is being more educated in the bad guys out there due to how easy you can access grappling, catch wrestling, wrestling. Is they're getting more educated on what to do, just putting their hands on you in a standing position. So module 6 addresses that. And like we said earlier, it addresses it in a way taking into consideration that you have a client and you also have a firearm on. Okay, we have 2 upcoming PRT training events coming up in May and October. So we have some Q codes there if you want to click on those and get more information.